most controversial political philosophy of our era. Douglas Murray takes a fresh look at the movement that replaced Great Society liberalism, helped Ronald Reagan bring down the wall, and provided the intellectual rationale for the Bush administration's war on terror. While others are blaming it for foreign policy failures and, more extremely, attacking it as a Jewish cabal, Murray argues that the West needs neoconservatism more than ever. In addition to explaining what neoconservatism is and where it came from, he argues that this American-born response to the failed policies of the 60s is the best approach to foreign affairs, not only for the United States, but also for Britain and the West as well. But for us, he spoke about the debate in London a couple of weeks ago. In the red corner, fighting for murderers and terrorists, Ken Livingstone and Salma Yaqub. And in the blue corner, Daniel Pipes and Douglas Murray. You heard a clip from Ken earlier telling us how safe London is for Jews. So here's Salma's view on what sort of event 7/7 was, and that'll be followed by Tom's first question.
When reprisal events like 7/7 take place, people like Daniel turn around and say, "See, I told you so. I told you they hate us." And then they go on to explain that Muslims are violent towards the West because they hate the Western way of life. And something in Islamic culture that breeds such violence. There is this ideology that's formed within the faith itself.
This Clash of Civilizations conference, it was supposed to be an ambush, wasn't it? You walked into an ambush with your eyes open.
Yes, very much so. Both Daniel Pipes and I had been warned by well-meaning friends and colleagues not to accept the invitation to debate Mayor Livingstone, and I can understand why those people gave that advice. Largely it was because people thought, quite rightly, that the mayor was flagging the event through his own website. It was every event in the day was heavily weighted against anyone who was sort of right-thinking in both senses of the term, and of course the audience was almost entirely made up of sort of Mayor of London kind of groupies, if there's any such thing. It was a very diverse audience, but almost entirely leftist, apart from the odd supporter of Pipes and mine, and so very, very strongly weighted against us in an arena of several thousand.
So tell me, why did you do it then? Why did you walk into this thing? All the cards were stacked against you.
Well, yes, they were. I suppose because I think it's a duty to, particularly at the moment, to be getting the right message out, and what's more, to be getting it out to people who might not have heard it before. I mean, it may sound arrogant to say that, but I mean, I really think that a lot of people are just getting bad information right now. They're getting bad ideas, and it's leading them to draw bad conclusions. I mean, very often I find, certainly when you see on campuses and things, you can speak to very radicalized campuses, but you always get some people who at least say, "I just haven't heard this stuff before, where can I go to find out more?" And I sort of thought at the very least there might be a few people in the audience who might be open-minded enough to at least be interested in what Pipes and I had to say. As it turned out, there was more than interest.
Well, that's the interesting thing, isn't it? That the audience did not respond in the way that Ken Livingstone or Salma Yaqub expected, did they?
No, and this is an important point, that the far left, of which Yaqub is a better example than Livingstone, as a member of George Galloway's Respect Party, she and her kind have spent a very long time now talking to very like-minded people who think like them. They've been touring the country and doing broadcasts, or, pretty much lectures and rally speeches at anti-war rallies and this sort of thing, in which every time they say the dictator Bush, they get a titter, and every time they refer to the occupation of Iraq, they get a clap, and every time they talk about the murders committed in the name of Britain and America and that idea, they get a gurgling approval of applause. But actually, one of the things is that those people have become very lazy now. And they're so used to speaking into the echo chamber of the left, of the extreme left and Islamists. They're so used to that kind of applause that actually they've forgotten that even the discerning kind of center-left public feels very alienated by this kind of discourse, and particularly alienated when you tell an audience like a London, and even a left-winger London audience, doesn't take kindly to a comment like Miss Jacobs when she referred to the 7/7 attacks as reprisal attacks.
This is something that's been happening a bit in the centre-left in Britain. There are growing signs. There's a bit of resistance to this extremism gathering. Nick Cohen's new book, Professor Gerris's Euston Manifesto.
That's like Oliver Cam, a great colleague and friend, who does great work on this as well. David Aronovich. It's a very interesting movement on the left in Britain, and it's been gathering pace.
Is it going to be effective, do you think? They seem to be really up against it.
I don't know how effective it'll be in numbers. It's effective in terms of sort of rescuing the sort of noble parts of the left, of which you and your listeners may disagree with me on this one, but there have been, points on which in the left's history where they have noble cause. And I think particularly of the humanitarian interventionist side of the left, which was after all the side that was most prominent in calling for intervention to stop the genocide in the Balkans in the mid-90s. The side that was, on side some of the way is Afghanistan, and then very largely jumped off the wagon with Iraq. These people, it seems to me, have some, significant moral clout, and I'm very impressed and supportive of the effort of those, however few they be on the left, who are now trying to make sure that the name of their movement isn't associated for all time with that of demagogues and arch-fascists like Galloway.
When you were actually up there on stage debating Selma Yaqub and Ken Livingstone, someone who's in that position can feel an audience. When you were feeling the response from the audience, what do you think was most effective? What did they really respond to best?
Several things. An interesting question. I mean, I discovered that the applause was very largely going my way by fairly early on in my speech, and was getting applause and ovations from parts of the hall. I wasn't expecting it. I discovered, for instance, that when I mentioned the simple fact, to my mind, that this is not our fault. The jihad is not our fault. The Mayor of London had already explained that the Cold War was our fault. Ms. Yaqub then explained how all the problems of the jihad are our fault because of Afghanistan and Iraq. I found that when I explained to the audience, for instance, that if it were the case that everything to do with the jihad is our fault, why is it that, Islamists are killing Buddhists in Indonesia and Thailand, Hindus in India, animists in the south of Sudan? I mean, this has nothing to do with Iraq. I found that not only did people from those communities, I don't know how many animists we had in the audience, but, for instance, Hindus, particularly Hindus from India, who were in the audience, in the London audience, were extremely vocal in their sort of gratitude, as it were, that anyone had mentioned their own plight. So I found that sort of thing was interesting. I also thought that the audience responded well generally, simply to the notion, this is kind of sick at this point. It's narcissistic to be so involved in this self-blame. Maybe it's not about you. I find that left-wing audiences and others, respond pretty well to that point. It's a point one should keep making. The natives can screw up without us. Other people have culpability. The other thing I would say is that there was one particular thing I did, which was at the end, I made sure that I let the audience know the kind of detritus, really, that Pipes and I were debating with. Selma Yaqub is a terrorist supporter, not just supporting the terrorism in Iraq, but started her career, such as it is, supporting the Yemen 7.
And she can't even say the word Israel. It can't pass her lips.
She couldn't even say what I call the I word. She wouldn't even say it. There were many things like that. And the other thing is, I got a very warm reception when I explained to the London audience the very important point with Livingstone, which is that in the whole of London, and it's worth always pointing this out, in the last 30 years only 2 groups of people have tried to murder them, Irish Republican extremists and Islamist extremists. They have nothing in common other than mass murder and the support of Ken Livingstone. And I have to say that I think was a fairly significant blow for him to be told that in front of a huge audience of his electorate, who then clapped the point.
The audience really didn't get the memo about how to behave, did they?
That's right. Well, they they didn't. They were usually when you have a very confrontational live debate like this. Usually, you can work out very early on what the percentage of audience behind you and what the percentage behind the other side is. The most interesting thing always are those debates where there's a crossover applause, where there's groups there are people applauding certain speakers or certain points that are not applauding others. Or that maybe have applauded points from the other side. In other words, when there's some texture to it. And I found that was the interesting thing about the hall, was that they were very, very vocal in support of certain points that Pipes and I were making, and in the end, much more supportive of our general argument. And I mean, it was a really a great moment, I think, for all of us who are on the right side in this conflict, that we really remembered again that we just have to put the case, and put the case whenever it comes up and however hostile the environment. We have to put the case and allow the truth to out.
Well, it would be very helpful if we could put the case to a larger audience, but the thing about this clash was that it wasn't reported in the mainstream media. No, I tell a lie, it was reported on the BBC Arabic service.
And I know the New York Sun and other papers had write-ups.
But it was moderated by Gavin Esler from the BBC. Why didn't the BBC and other media outlets report on this? It seems like a pretty interesting thing.
Yeah, the truth is I don't buy there's some kind of cover-up with this. What I do think is the case is that the British media, and I mean friends I've been speaking to in the last week or more from the British media have sort of confirmed this, is that just as a thought experiment, I mean if you were an editor of a paper over in Britain, say, just as a thought experiment, I mean what could Livingstone have said that he hasn't already said? I mean, he's already said he thinks George Bush is a greater terrorist than Osama bin Laden. You know, he's already said that he doesn't think Israel has the right to have been created. I mean, you know, every foul, disgraceful idea he's already voiced. So the British press didn't think they'd get a story. They didn't think they'd get the horrible quote from the mayor. I think that personally that's why the British print press in particular didn't show up in large quantities. But I mean, there were something like 150 foreign press there in total. Sometimes
this whole conflict seems to be almost tribal. There's us on our side and there's them on their side, and never the twain shall meet. I mean, for example, I was supposed to go out on a date with someone tomorrow, but she found out before meeting me that I didn't think George Bush was a drooling moron. I was dumped by SMS, and we can't even breed across these lines. Based on your experience, can we cross that division? Are there ways that we can get our message across to people on the other side in such a way that they'll actually understand it and go along with us? What's the best way to punch through this wall?
This is possibly the most important question about this conflict is, yes, quite, can one communicate with people on the other side? The answer briefly is we have to. I mean, we have to be able to. There are not enough people at the moment who get the fact that there are people out there who hate us and want to kill us and have already done so. It's really our duty to communicate to leftists and others who have ears that there are ways for which we can unite, certain things we can rally together on.
It seemed very much as a left and right issue, but it really shouldn't be one, should it?
It isn't, and it isn't one. I mean, I think actually of the last few years, it's maybe an obvious point to make, but in the post sort of 2001 era, I have found myself that my closest allies are either leftists or former leftists in very many cases. I'm thinking of people like Oliver Camm, William Shawcross, who used to be a leftist and is now one of our most prominent, supporters of the troops, commentators in Britain. William Shawcross used to be on the left. I think of my friend Christopher Hitchens, who I don't think anyone, certainly not the White House, anyone in government, has been a greater or more eloquent advocate of the Iraq War. It's very interesting. There are a great number of people on the left who really get this. What their constituency is, it's impossible to tell, but we have to get people like that on side, and we have to keep them on side. And we can disagree on welfare benefits, we can disagree on taxation, we can disagree on all these things, But if we can have common cause on the one big thing, I mean, this is the most important thing of our era. This is the most important aspect of our time. And, you know, to my mind, as I always say, it applies to the president, it applies to many other people. If you get to the main thing, you allow people a lot to screw up on other things.